Welcome to another episode of The Neurocurrent, my very informal new podcast where I love to talk about anything relating to neurodiversity, neuroscience, entrepreneurship, creativity, culture, all these things, because they all are interesting and they matter. I am Lacey Artemis, aka the Sensory Nerd. I am the founder of Neuromix Consulting and Beyond Quiet Rooms, and I am very delighted today to be joined by I keep doing this. I'm forgetting to check people's name pronunciations before I introduce them.
Falisha.
The last name. Is it Karpati?
Karpati.
Karpati, okay. I'm happy to be joined by Falisha Karpati, and she will introduce herself.
Hey everyone, and thanks so much, Lacey, for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk about brains. So my name is Falisha. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a brain-based inclusion consultant. I'm located in Montreal, Canada. And I help organizations integrate brain science to foster inclusive practices and a positive workplace culture. So I bring a PhD in neuroscience and a decade of studying the brain. So I spent lots of time studying what's happening up here. And that's my passion, it's my focus. I love brains. And more concretely, what I do in organizations, I support workplace culture assessments through surveys and focus groups that are really customized to specific contexts. I support strategy development like equity, diversity, inclusion strategies, training programs, and hiring processes. I offer neuroscience-based workplace training, and I offer one-on-one individual consultations to support the integration of brain science in workplace practice.
Wonderful. Yeah. And so as people might know, if you don't know, I do sensory focused consulting, and I focus primarily on, actually switch back to, here's the problem with being the producer and the host at the same time. I do focus on environments, the environments that people are in. I have a background, one of my many pieces of my background is in music production, audio engineering. So I apply those concepts and a bit of music theory to, built environments that humans exist within, whether it's workplaces or classrooms or hospitals. I really focus on event spaces because I feel like that's one of the biggest offenders of sensory overwhelm. But it's been, our work has kind of ended up overlapping because where I have kind of more of the creative technical production sort of background, now I'm getting a lot more into the neuroscience of it. And that's where, like, I've always loved science, but I never formally studied any of it. So it's really cool for me to kind of get to have like a second wind in life where I get to really get my fingers dirty. Yeah. I'm interested to talk about, as I was sort of saying to you before we started recording, that I was talking to somebody else recently, and I made that sort of connection of, I look at what I do as sort of like the external sensory kind of realm, being the things that the space around us, the factors around us that are impacting us. And then you have the interpretation piece where our brains receive those inputs and what happens with them. And I know there's a lot of overlap there from the reading that I've been doing with how I noticed you said like how certain things literally just make you feel when you're in a workplace, for example, and what that does to you. So why don't we jump into that a little bit?
Oh yes, there's so much going on in my brain and your brain right now, and the first thing that comes to mind based on what you were saying is sort of the impact that the environments have on how we feel and what we think. Mm-hmm. And that's so important to keep in mind. And I think there can be a lot of tendency to think that, oh, somebody's behaving this way because that's just who they are. And in reality, people's behavior is so dependent on their environment. You can take a moment to reflect on how you might behave differently in different kinds of spaces, like at work or at home or with a close friend or with somebody that you don't know. You're still you, your brain is still your brain, but the physical space that you're in, the people that are around you, those can have a major impact on how you're going to behave in those particular places. So it's really, really important to consider that external environment and how we can design that to support positive brain processes.
Yeah, and one of the things that I have written blog posts about is this idea of sensory resilience. And I know in the disability community, there's a thing called spoon theory, which a lot of people are familiar with. And it's this metaphor for spoons kind of being like units of energy, or more accurately, it's like action points if you're thinking like a video game. So you can only do so many actions before you have to like recharge or wait till the next kind of day or something. And so throughout our lives, throughout our days, we're always, whether how much we slept, like if we had like a good breakfast, or if we're having a really stressful day, or we just had a breakup and there's those emotional raw nerves happening, these things all impact our resilience, or our ability to process and tolerate the sensory input that we're receiving. So this is kind of why I make the argument that why I literally called my site and my thing Beyond Quiet Rooms, because quiet rooms are just kind of like offloading the problem. Like, and the other thing I say with that is that if you send people to a separate space, they have to leave whatever experience that they're supposed to be having. They're often going to be by themselves, so they're isolated. And then trying to go back into the main space is kind of almost like going from like a nice comfy hot tub into a pool. It's going to be quite a, yeah, just the way that you reacted there, you knew exactly what I was talking about.
Oh, that extreme shift, and your brain is like, what is happening right now?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's why I feel like we need to make the actual, like the native, the inherent base environments comfortable, so that people can come in and just be calm and focus and connect the way that they want to.
I love that that recommendation not to separate those spaces. I think having a quiet area can be really important if people feel that they need a break from crowds or from sounds. But there's ways to do that that aren't going halfway across the building to sit in a separate room that has absolutely no connection to the main space, no ambiance. It's really sort of an add-on thing that also doesn't feel great.
Mm. And I know for myself, like when I've been in office environments, I often would need to spend part of my lunch break to go try to find a quieter place. But the other thing is, like, it's not even just the sound. There's like the light, and there might be sense, and there's temperature, and all these other things. And um, I've gone to some pretty significant lengths to find places that had more than just were quiet, that were also kind of a bit dimmer, or so I've actually had naps in a stairwell before, because it was the only place that I could find that was like away from chaos.
Like sometimes you know what you need, and sometimes what you feel you need isn't maybe what other people thought you need, or isn't what most people need. And I think that applies to a lot of different aspects of workplace practice, especially. It's where I focus, but also events and any other spaces. Like even the way that people want to sit or posture themselves or stand or lie down, or however they need to position their body. Sometimes you know what your body needs. And, sometimes it's a stairwell, sometimes it's a different kind of seating, sometimes it's moving around. I think it's important to keep in mind that your brain will tell you when it feels right for you. And if you're having that feeling of this room doesn't feel right, this seat doesn't feel right, I need to change my position, that's coming from your brain. Every thought you have, every sensation you have, it goes through your brain. And yeah, when you get those feelings, it's like, I can't sit like this, or I can't be with this lighting. It's not just, oh, I want something different. It's like, no, there is actually a process happening in the brain that says, this is not working right now.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious how much, there's a term that I came across recently, and I guess there's probably some different terms for the same kind of concept, but it came up as attention gating. Are you familiar with that kind of idea?
No, I haven't heard the term.
That's what I'm saying. You probably know the concept. So basically what it's talking about is how, like, how we have the what's it called? Like the cocktail, listening where like you're an event and you can kind of target your listening to different people and you can block
Cocktail
everything else
party.
out. So I've noticed, and I think this is very common, especially with ADHD brains, that like sometimes I can be really like anxious and like because I don't feel like I have something to like lock my focus into. But then if I can get into like a conversation with somebody where I'm like really engaged, it's like my brain can just tune everything else out. But then when that conversation ends, and I'm like, okay, now what do I focus on? All of a sudden, it just all hits me again. And that's one of the terms for that is attention gating. And I was like, that is such a huge thing.
Your brain is constantly making decisions about what's important, what's not important, where do I direct attention? Because there's so much stimulus happening everywhere at events, at work, at home, literally anywhere. There's so many things that you can be directing your attention to, the wall, the background noise, how your shirt feels on you. And the brain is constantly deciding which of these is the most important. And sometimes that's a really hard decision because it can feel like multiple things are important. It can feel like maybe nothing feels important, but then everything feels important at the same time. So you just try and keep everything in mind. And then, yeah, when you focus on something and you decide this is where my attention is needed right now, and after that stimulus has gone, your brain has to start the process over again. It's going to take everything in again and again make the decision of now what do I need to focus on because maybe it's different from last time.
And I think that's something that like event planners and event hosts, for example, don't like. I know that they often don't consider the sensory because a lot of them aren't bothered by it, but I think that's a thing that is really taken for granted to think that. Because I mean, oftentimes a lot of events are happening in the evenings after people have been at work all day, and like you know, maybe you had a good day at work, great, good for you, but like you still go into like this super intense environment. So if you had a really busy, stressful, tiring day, like this is why a lot of times I just like I want to go to that thing, I don't have it in me. But that's what you're just sort of talking about as well as why you know there's that thing where we can't like smell our own breath or we can't smell our own body odor because we smell it all the time and our brain just tunes it out unless it gets like significantly bad enough that we can't ignore it anymore.
There has to be a significant change in one of those things for your brain to realize, oh, this is different. Your brain will really pay attention to things that have changed.
That's like a survival thing, like an evolutionary thing.
Exactly. So if we take it back to evolution, if you are in a physical environment and maybe there's other people around, maybe there's trees, if you see something move really fast behind the tree, that's a threat. And you really need to be paying attention to it. So your brain is wired to pick up those sudden movements, those that's in more modern times, that can be a light flicker, it can be a sudden noise, it can be somebody moving really quickly, or you know, a screen flickering, anything that's a change that's sudden, your brain's like, what's that?
Yeah, and the other piece with that I think is really, again, I've been really diving a lot more into neuroscience recently, and it's just like I love it. But like two things that you just made me think of. So one thing is with the flicker that you just mentioned, there are certain sensory inputs that we don't notice because they're like either we literally can't actively see them, or it's like just sort of low enough level that our brain's kind of tuning out, but it's still hitting us. And like a flicker or like a strobing can be one of those things. But the other day, I just remembered this happened to me, and it like because I've been thinking about this stuff a lot, it sort of gave me a new perspective. But I was like walking down the street, and like I just flinched all of a sudden, and like my brain noticed something before I was even aware of it, and it reacted. And I was like, just like how that blew my mind that it was able to react before I was even aware that something was there. I was like, but that's survival. We have to do that. Yeah. So
your brain processes things so quickly. Your brain is doing so much before you are consciously aware of what exactly it is you're perceiving. And we see that in brain research. So there's studies that show that even if you put something, let's say like a visual stimulus, a picture or something that somebody's looking at while they're in the brain scanner, you can put it so fast that they can't consciously register it, but you'll still see some brain activity that's associated with it. And a really interesting one. So I work a lot in the diversity and inclusion space, and there's a really interesting study that shows that if you show someone a picture of another person, and in this experiment, they showed photos of people with different gender expressions and different skin tones, and they showed that people's brains actually showed differences related to the gender expression and the skin tone so fast before people even would recognize that they were looking at a person. So your brain is constantly processing different aspects of what you're perceiving and even making assumptions, making judgments before you even realize what exactly is around you.
Okay, I want to come back to this in a second, but I want to mention something else first before I forget it because of ADHD.
Cool.
I want to talk about self-advocacy in a moment because that's obviously like a big part of what you do, and it's part of like people have been asking me about that for my stuff. But I'm going to be a little bit self-serving here and bring up something I've talked about in other contexts before, but this very much relates to you. The idea of neuroplasticity. Some people are familiar with this and some aren't, but I tell this story about how 15 years ago, I've always been a heavy computer user my entire life. And about 15 years ago, my carpal tunnel was getting so bad that like I just couldn't use my normally dominant arm. It's like, well, my choices are either stop using the computer, which was basically not an option, or just, work until maybe I like lost function of the arm. So I did a unusual thing and I switched to my opposite hand for using the mouse on the computer. And it took me 6 months to get comfortable enough with it that I could like do it without, and to this day, and I've noticed that because I've been doing this now for 15 years, I sort of trained myself to be like ambidextrous, not like 100%, but like a lot more. And there's certain things now that I can do that like I can actually throw a ball with a lot more accuracy.
Yeah, the brain can change. And I think we often think like, oh, this is I've learned everything I can. I often find that people have a misconception that you can learn at really young ages in childhood and teens, and then nope, that's it. I can't learn anything more as an adult. And that is completely false. There's brain research that shows that we can learn throughout the lifespan. There's actually lots of research recently on older adults looking at how different types of training, different types of physical activity, or like memory training and things like that can actually have physical and activity changes in the brain. And as we practice skills, as we learn, our brains really adapt to that. And that connects a lot with my PhD research. I actually looked at the brains of musicians and dancers, and looking at how training in arts can impact the brain. And there's a whole body of research on that shows that even 2 weeks of training can create activity differences in the brain. Structural changes take a bit longer, but even 2 weeks, you start to see differences in how the brain is acting. Mm-hmm. So it's a good reminder that we can always learn. But I also think another piece that's really important when we think of neuroplasticity is that people are born in certain ways. People have natural structures that their brain carries and natural ways of processing information. So neuroplasticity can be used for good in terms of learning new skills, but it's important not to cross the line into asking or expecting people to change who they naturally are, because that's quite different. So, for example, if somebody is naturally introverted, sure, they can practice perhaps skills that are more associated with extroversion and learn. It doesn't change the fact that they are naturally have an introverted brain. It just means they're practicing a different skill. And similarly, I know we're talking about sensory environments today. If somebody is naturally more sensitive to certain types of environments, that is how their brain is wired. And it's important to respect that and offer inclusive spaces and not expect them to change.
I managed to not forget about the self-advocacy piece. That's a thing that relates to both of the work that we each do. And I'm sort of approaching it, I guess, from the point of, if I teach people more of the, like, I guess, sub-language beyond it's loud or it's bright, they kind of understand a little bit more of the, like, the finer points of what is behind that. In your case, I'm curious what sort of, like, self-advocacy looks like in the work that you do, like teaching people how to self-advocate for their needs.
So I really focus on creating environments that welcome difference and welcome sharing of needs in ways that don't necessarily require labels. So for example, when I support workplace inclusion, I'll recommend practices like work style profiles, where individuals can describe how they work best, how they communicate best, how they like to collaborate, what kinds of environments work well for them, and offering that opportunity for everybody. So we normalize needs sharing and preference sharing for everyone. And that can make it easier for people who tend to experience more barriers to share what they need, because everybody is doing it. So we're not separating necessarily people who need differences in accommodations compared to people who don't. We're talking about everybody has a different range of needs, and we're going to work together to really make sure that all of those get met.
And so this is a question that I sometimes bring up with guests. If you can, and I'm putting you on the spot with this, I realize. Is there any particular, like, issue or thing that comes up that in your work that you feel like doesn't get talked about enough, or that there definitely needs to be, like, more awareness around?
Lots. Trying to hone in on one.
I'm sorry, that was a very broad question I just threw on you there.
Yeah, no worries. I think just understanding how much of an impact the workplace really has on mental health, on our brain health, on how we function, especially for people who are experiencing barriers and inequities in the workplace. I think there's brain research that shows how experiencing exclusion, oppression, unfairness, that has measurable biological impacts on our brain function. And I think a lot of the time, inappropriate conduct or unfair practices just gets dismissed as like, oh, it's not a big deal, deal with it. And I think that is absolutely awful for so many reasons, moral reasons, but from a brain perspective, that when people are experiencing, whether it's sensory overload on a daily basis, whether it's harassment, whether it's social exclusion, that really impacts how their brain is going to continue to function. It can have long-term health effects. So when we create inclusive spaces, we support well-being, we support mental health, we support biological brain health while we're doing that. So I just think that understanding the depth of the harm that those exclusionary environments can really have.
Yeah, and that's again, I relate strongly to that from my side of things, because as you said, people just deal with it or whatever, and that's kind of the attitude I feel like a lot of society has towards sensory issues. Like, I'll just get earplugs, just do this, do that, and it's like, instead of actually like, okay, but the environment is causing this issue, so it's kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, I feel like. And obviously that, like I said, this is why I think it's like well, like I said, that's, I think the exclusion or feeling like, treated unfairly, those are sort of like external social factors in an environment, whereas the external sensory factors are like the loud stuff going on or bright lights or things. So and this is why I also think, like, as I've been getting into this work, and I know a lot of people have been like, oh, you should like get into, go to offices, like they'd love this stuff. And I'm like, I feel like that realm, like office consulting around like anti-burnout and neuro-inclusion and stuff, is a bit saturated, but I don't see many people looking at the like spaces and like what's going on like a deeper level. So I'm glad to get in there and start to, because that area I think needs to get pushed into the modern times a little bit. Is there anything, I guess instead of asking such an open-ended question, is there anything that you wish that you got to talk about more, even just from like a passionate geeky standpoint about the neuroscience?
I definitely want to get into, I guess, differences in how we process sensory information. So then going back to something that I've mentioned multiple times is that the way that your brain is right now is based on how you were naturally born and the experiences that you bring. And that means that everybody's brain works a little bit different. So you can put 2, 3, 5 people in the same space and they might have completely different reactions. The way that your brain takes in information and processes information, decides what's important, that can really vary between people. So it's really important to keep in mind that your experience might be different from others. So when there's event planning happening, just to keep in mind that you see the world through your own brain, and that's one way of seeing the world. Others might be entering the same space and their brain is going to pick up on completely different things, react differently. So that really brings in the importance of working with people like you, of getting input early in the event process to make sure that different perspectives and different experiences are going to be considered in the planning.
Mm-hmm. This is, I'll say this a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I also would say every like planning team should have an autistic person on it, because like we're great at noticing things that nobody else notices. Pattern recognition machines we are.
Every brain has its strengths, and the more strengths you get in a room and in a planning process, the more you'll be able to design spaces that are going to bring joy and productivity to the diverse participant group that will be coming in.
I'm going to take a pause for a second here. So I don't think I've actually mentioned this. I have been running, I got that? Yeah, okay, I got the URL right. I've been running a bunch of surveys. They started last fall and they're kind of ongoing, but it's a couple of more like lengthy ones than a few shorter ones now, but they're to gather people's personal experiences in sensory conditions in either like events or just kind of broadly. And I'm looking at actually collaborating with a couple of people to potentially make a couple new custom surveys. So, but if anyone has the time, 5 minutes to spare, and they'd like to go contribute to a bit of research and helping with advocacy around sensory factors, that is worth considering there. And again, just Beyond Quiet Rooms is, it started out as a blog on Substack. It's still a blog on Substack, but it's also now a website that has more of like a information repository. So it's kind of a mixture of like my business website and a little online hub. So there's that. And yeah, the other one quickly, I want to shout out Neurodiversity Change Foundation, because they're also focused on changing systems for the better, to obviously to be more inclusive and welcoming to and understanding of neurodiverse experiences. So I want to give them a shout out. I come back to yours as well again. Did you want to say anything about, like, get into maybe a little bit more specifics of any sort with, so you have a framework that you've developed, I was seeing on your website. If you want to maybe do a quick rundown of that.
Sure. So I have my signature framework that guides my approach to consulting and training, and it's called Uniting Brains, where uniting is a process and brains is the outcome that we're working towards. So uniting is a 6-step process that begins with understanding the context and foundational neuroscience, into needs assessment and collaborative plan development and implementation through experimenting, into monitoring and continuous growth. And that's a process that can be implemented across many different types of organizational practices. It can be developing an event plan, it can be developing an inclusion strategy or a training program. And brains are the 6 experiences that your brain needs to thrive at work. And also that applies to many different environments. Like I focus on workplaces, but these also apply in different contexts. So that covers B is for breadth, so acceptance and affirmation of diversity. It's important that we feel that we are welcomed, accepted, and respected for who we are. And we have reliability, which means trust in individuals in the organization. Access, feeling like we have, or not feeling, just actually having equal opportunity to fully participate. Importance, which is feeling that we are recognized, appreciated, and valued, that we have autonomy in what we're doing. Networks, which is building those shared connections with others, and support for health and well-being.
Very nice. Yeah, I was reading through that, and I love when people come up with these great, especially when they use like a word and turn it into a great framework like that. I did that with mine as well. I took the word solace and I turned it into my model. So that's also an acronym. It stands for sound, olfactory, light, accumulation, climate, and ergonomics. Because again, it was just I was looking out there and I didn't see any like systems or models that seemed like they were considering all of the factors. It was almost always just like sound and light, and sometimes sense. And I realized, but these are all factors that are impacting us, and they're all accumulating together, hence the accumulation of A. And so that's my cross-sector model for sensory comfort. And on that note, so I know I sent you, I recently, I haven't fully, I think it's linked on my website now, but I came up with right now it's a 1-page of sensory terminology, and it's a lot of like proper terms, but this was my brain going into like just down a rabbit hole one day, and because I drew the connection of like, there's like hypersensitivity and there's hyposensitivity, and there's like, if you have like phonophilia, that means you really like music or sound. If you have phonophobia, then you're repulsed by it. And there's all these other things, and I just kind of went down the rabbit hole and researched all those and put it into like a chart. And I will be expanding that later when I have more time. But do you have any particular like terms or concepts from like neuroscience, perhaps even specifically related to sensory stuff, that you want to shout out here? We have some terminology nerd out.
As soon as you sent me that document, I was like, all the words. I mean, there's so much terminology in neuroscience, but especially related to the senses. I love the word. So for anything that's smell related, it's olfactory. So we have the olfactory bulb that's deep in your brain. For taste, it's gustatory. So you have a gustatory cortex, which is a part of the brain that's like, it's like sort of here, but it's like really, it's deep in. You actually kind of have to go like this for another part of the brain to get into it. And it just makes me think of all of the neuroanatomy. So another fun fact about sense in the brain, your vision cortex, so it processes input from your eyes, is actually all the way in the back of the brain. So it's got a long way to go to get back there. And that would be the visual cortex. So lots of words, lots of brain parts.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned in my research that I've been doing, because I didn't actually completely know beforehand, like I knew that our brain processes all the sensory signals, but it turns out that smell is actually the one that gets handled a little bit differently than the rest of them do, which you mentioned the olfactory bulb, or olfactory, not old factory, olfactory bulb, and then the thalamus, which is the traffic control for everything, which I thought was kind of cool to learn. And like, again, one day I'm just going to need to like go down a rabbit hole and just like study all the brain parts, because there's, you know, the cortex and the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland and all these things, and they all do something, but we don't know what most of us don't know what all those things are. So,
and a lot of them do multiple things.
Very cool. Yeah. I not to get completely off topic, but I know that through following sports as loosely as I do, and kind of learning of some of the injuries that happen there, particularly in some cases spinal cord injuries, there's some interesting things that I've learned there about how, like, I mean, even with like paralysis, how the difference between like being is it para versus quadriplegic? I was trying to remember the words, and like even with anesthesia, that's being so anesthesia, the roots of that, so the AN at the beginning is like lack of, so it's no, and then thesia is the feeling part, so that's the parts of that word. So that's part of why I made that chart, is because I recognize that they're all like suffixes and prefixes and things going together in a predictable format. And so I just wanted to like put them all in one place together and be like, okay, this is the chart. I realize I'm saying this and nobody can actually see it, so I'll have to link it in the show notes. But
I think it's really helpful to learn some of these words as well, because it helps understand the diversity of experiences that people have. That when we have words to put with different experiences and different ways that people can describe how they're feeling and have a shared identity with a known concept, that can really help with designing spaces, because we have a broader range of understanding of what needs and what experiences are actually going to happen there.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, that was part of it for me, was again like having the language and the terminology to be able to understand your experience and to relate it. And on kind of that note, I have something called Raynaud's phenomenon. You might be familiar with that.
I am.
It's a circulation disorder. So basically means that I get cold very easily and I have a hard time warming back up. So it sucks that I live in Canada. But as I was doing the research, you know, because I remember having a friend who told me that she actually had like a biological condition that she could not sweat. And I was like, what's the like actual proper term for that? And so I like looked it up and like, well, if there's one for that, then there's got to be one for like the opposite. And again, down the rabbit hole. And so I found out that hypertremorism is a fancy way of saying having really severe like shivering and teeth chattering. And it's anhydrosis is the inability to sweat. So if you're like a terminology nerd and you like stuff like that, I will link to this chart and you should check it out. And I'm totally going to turn this into a book, because that is just going to be such a fun little project for me to dive into.
And learning some of the key like prefixes and suffixes like hyper, hypo, phobia, philia, just having those foundations, I think those apply to so many different types of experiences, different conditions. So starting from there can really help with expanding the vocabulary and the understanding of the different experiences.
I should probably do a webinar just of like sensory terminology. I'm just realizing this. But yeah, I have other questions here I could ask you, but we're kind of we're into the interview here, and I want to keep it light. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you want to cover before we wrap up here?
I mean, I always have lots of things going on in my brain, but I think something that we haven't touched on is, I think I've actually sort of brought this in pieces, so I'm going to put it together. The impact that past experiences and particularly traumatic experiences can have on the way that people experience and react to different spaces. So my key point, I'm going to say it again because it's super important, that your brain, the way your brain is a combination of how you're naturally born and your experiences, and that includes any traumatic experiences that you've had. So if somebody is coming into a space that maybe they've had a negative experience in a similar space before, or maybe a sound, a smell, something reminds them of something that brings negativity or fear for them, that is a natural reaction in the brain. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that the brain is protective. So if somebody is having a strong reaction to something, if they're afraid, if they want to leave, if they're experiencing an aversion to something, that is the threat, the natural fear response that's happening in the brain. And it's important to take that seriously and offer support, understand what it was in the environment. I think just to realize that our brain is really out to protect us, and sometimes those reactions can come in event spaces, in workspaces, in any kind of physical environment. So I think to plan ahead for any common things. So for example, sudden noises is a big one, but also understanding that different people will be bringing in different experiences. That, the smell of chocolate chip cookies maybe is so positive for somebody. It reminds them of their, something that a loved family member used to make for them. For somebody else, maybe that's connected with a negative place or a negative relationship, and we don't know that, and we can't necessarily plan in ahead for every single thing, but just what we can do is be transparent about what the space is going to look like, what kind of food is going to be served, what kind of music will we have, just so people are prepared for what to expect, and to also ask for any needs and make that effort to include everybody that's going to be participating.
I'm really glad that you brought that up for a couple of reasons. One is because there's actually a few apps that I'm aware of that are in development around tracking or monitoring sensory factors in spaces to kind of either know ahead of time what you're walking into, which I know myself and many people appreciate, but also once you're there and you can kind of monitor your sort of like exposure level, as it were. And then there's some online community-driven like website type databases, not through an app, that people can go in and like manually like log and report around certain spaces. So I think that's a really great trend that's starting to become more common, because I think we definitely need to go that way. And I know I can speak from my own personal experience, so this can kind of go out to anyone out there watching or listening who might relate to this, but I do have trauma from my youth, and I very much have been a people-pleasing type for much of my life. And it sounds silly to say it, but like sometimes if I go to an event and I'm like, I feel overwhelmed and I'm maybe just not having a really good time anymore and I want to go, and I feel like a sense of guilt because I'm like, well, if the host or the organizer sees me leave, they're gonna feel like that's like an insult to them. And like part of me wants to be like, I'm not trying to be rude to you. I just need to go. And I've had to, through practice, just practice just walking out and feeling, for maybe like 5 or 10 seconds, I'll be like, I feel bad about that. But once I'm out and I'm like, out to the street and I'm just like any other pedestrian now, it's like, okay, well, it's done. I'm out of there and I just get on with my life now. But if you're one of those people like me who feels that sort of guilt or that sense of maybe shame, or you have a hard time doing that, what's right for you, what you need in that moment, if that is leaving, I just encourage you to just try to practice doing it. Or if you can bring a friend and have them say, like, if they're more comfortable, because that's another thing I found with some people, that if they have a friend, like if the friend will just be like, hey, I'm just gonna take your hand and we're just gonna walk out together, It's like then they're not really making the choice 100%. Somebody else is kind of like dragging them out. But that is a reality that exists for a lot of people. And so if you're listening to or watching this, I see you, I feel you, and I hope that this can get easier for all of us.
And in that kind of a context, the event organizers have a role to play as well. That if you are an organizer, a speaker, you can also explicitly say that, doing whatever you need to do in this space, even if that's leaving, is welcome. So I do a lot of training facilitation, and I will generally say, if you need to take a break, if you need to get some food or water, if you need to move around, please feel free to do whatever you need to do here. You don't need to ask permission or justify. So I think it can mean a lot to attendees if you say, hey, we know sometimes you need a break, sometimes you're done for the day and you need to go. That is absolutely fine, and we understand. That can really create a safe space and avoid that that fear of leaving or that sense of guilt that you might experience after.
Absolutely. I think that's a great spot for us to conclude this on. Falisha, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today. And once again, it's FalishaKarpati.com. Definitely check out our website. It's got lots of goodies on there. It's a fun time. And again, for me, it's beyondquietrooms.com, or you can find me on some social media now as @sensorynerd. And until next time, I want to thank folks for sitting with me, and I got a little bit ADHD today. I could feel it. So thanks for sitting with me through that. And until next time, stay curious.
I love that. Stay curious.
Yeah, it's a great quality to have. All right.
Thanks so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.